Welcome to Activate Your Introvert, the weekly show to help you recognize and unlock the entrepreneur skills in your business. Company culture gets blamed for all manner of things, from incredible success to company failure. I'm not sure if that's realistic or not, but fixing company culture often seems to be a leadership nirvana. In today's episode, we're exploring company culture, how it affects introverts, and how introverts can affect culture. And of course, when you want to understand about company culture, go to the best. I'm really pleased to be interviewing Benjamin Drury, the culture guy. But first, introvert myth of the week. I had an interesting discussion this week where I was told that introverts don't listen in meetings. And as proof of the statement, I was told they're not interacting as much as other people in the meeting, which seemed weird. But my first thought was, oh yeah, there are a number of people in meetings that don't interact very much. And if you look at them, they're doodling, if you remember the days when we used to have face-to-face meetings. Or maybe they have a vacant look if their camera is actually still on in the remote meeting. And I'm sure you've seen both of those too. But they're not all introverts. So, if your meeting is so boring, you're losing your audience, first of all, it's your fault. Break the meeting up. Have more interactive elements, especially if it's a remote meeting. So, firstly, not listening is something that lots of people do, not just introverts. Secondly, and I've tried this a few times, if you asked somebody to summarize what's just been said, you'll find out if they really were listening. I'm not saying you should do it all the time, but when you try, you'll probably find introverts are listening, even if they don't look like it. So that's another myth in the bin. Do let me know what introvert myth you'd like exposed, or what tip you'd like that would help you to activate the entrepreneurial skills in your business. I'd also love to hear your feedback about this series on the Apple iTunes Store or podchaser.com. Please take a moment after the show. And finally, if you'd like to talk to me about speaking at your conference, virtual or face-to-face, I'd love to hear from you. But now, let's get on with this week's interview. Welcome, Ben.
Hi, John. It's good to be here.
Are you an introvert or an extrovert?
I need to process that, so I'll get back to you.
Okay, let me think what that might mean then.
Introvert through and through, John.
Brilliant, thank you. What does that mean to you?
To me, it's one of these misnomers that so many people misunderstand slightly. To me, an introvert means kind of two things. One, I process things before I speak. So, I'll ruminate on things and I'll come up with things and I'll process lots of information. And then when I speak, I've got my thoughts in order. Whereas my wife, completely the opposite. She will speak, she will think out loud and she'll talk to process stuff. I think the extension of that is you don't live out here. You live in here and then express yourself. Whereas I think extroverts live out here and then make sense of it in the other way around.
That's really interesting. And I always love asking that because different people explain it in different ways. And one day perhaps I'll even become some knowledgeable about it in some way. Talking about your area of expertise, Ben, what is culture?
It's one of those questions that always gets asked, and there's a lot of misunderstanding. Most people think it's kind of touchy-feely and ethereal, and it's all about emotions. But the bottom line is, it is a simple thing. It's the shared set of values. If I came round your house as a guest and started, wiping my feet on your carpet and helping myself to your favourite drinks from your fridge and using language that you wouldn't use in your house, would that make you uncomfortable?
I certainly would not be too pleased, even if it was just because I was thinking about cleaning the carpet the next day.
There is an appropriate way to behave when I come round your house. And It's that little word appropriate. That's all culture is. The expected norms of a group of people. When two or more people come together, eventually you get a shared set of values and behaviors that everybody thinks, okay, that's fine. We'll adhere to that. That's all culture is.
Shared behaviours and you say appropriate. Given that definition then, is it reasonable to blame culture for company failures and company successes?
Absolutely, definitely. What is a company but a group of people with a purpose? In order to achieve that purpose, you have to define the behaviors you want. And if you define the wrong behaviors, your company's not going to get where you want it to go. If you define the right behaviors, you stand a chance. And that is all culture is, defining those behaviors and saying, this is how we're going to do stuff. If you get that right, you're liable to be heading in the right direction.
What then is the impact that it will have on introverts? Introverts could also have an impact on the company culture as well, couldn't they?
Absolutely, yeah. The thing about introverts is because they process stuff internally, it takes them a little bit longer to respond to things. It takes them a little bit longer to get stuff out. We have to allow time for introverts when we are talking about behaviors and when we are imposing metrics and rewards to try and kind of instill certain behaviors that we want. You've got to give introverts a little more time. You can't just say, well, you haven't responded, you haven't done that. That's not actually, well, hold on a minute. Yeah, I'm with the values. I'm just trying to figure out how I internalize those and process those before I step up. So there is a case of when you are going through culture change, you have to allow for those people to process it. I was talking to somebody the other day about an example where they had the CEO, the MD, was completely extrovert, absolutely processed out there and moved very fast. His team, on the whole, were introvert, and they processed things and they understood the impact of it, and then they went and did things. Then they moved. And there was this clash. He couldn't understand why people weren't coming with him on this journey. And it was just a simple, give them a little bit of time and then repeat it and they'll come with you. They just need that time to process it. And similarly, the other way around, I fully appreciate that sometimes introverts don't feel like they're having any impact on the culture, because if you are in a team with extroverts, or there's a lot of extroverts, they can be processing things externally and interacting in that and moving things, and you haven't had a chance to input. So you've got to make sure that you, as an introvert, everybody around you knows that you will get to the party, you just need some time. And you don't allow people to run away with it just because you haven't had your input. You will get there, and people need to know that in your team in order for you to be able to contribute.
So does that imply that introverts are slow?
No, it implies that when introverts speak, they tend to have got to some form of conclusion. Whereas when extroverts speak, they'll change their mind 14 times. They may all get to the same place at the same time. It's just a different way of doing it.
Coming back to the culture thing then, if I was a leader of a business and I wanted to get a culture that was right for success, what kind of things do I need to do?
That is a great question, and it depends where you want to go. The thing about culture is there is no right culture. There is no, this is the way we do things. There is strong culture and there is weak culture. I'll give you an example. The history of Uber in social terms and legal terms is not necessarily squeaky clean. There's some pretty unpleasant things in its past, but it had a really, really strong culture of win at all costs. Doesn't matter what lines you cross, it's all about winning. And that's the culture that was instilled, and that's the value that was there, and they were really strong on it. And so they succeeded. Now that success came at a cost, but the guys that ran it, the guys that set it up, they weren't interested in that cost. They succeeded. They got where they wanted to go because they were really strong on what mattered. And you and I may disagree with the way they went about it, but that's irrelevant. Where they were trying to get to, they built a culture and they went there. It's not a culture I would have built, and it's not a culture I'd want to be part of, but it did the job. So the key in success is all about strong culture versus weak culture. And by that, I mean being really clear on who you are and what you stand for and where you're trying to go, and making sure everything in your organization lines up, versus just being, we'll see how it goes and we're not really sure where we're going and we're just doing some stuff and it doesn't really matter how you go about it, as long as strong culture are the ones that succeed. The weak ones are the ones that take a lot longer to get there.
Again, I'm going to come back to this interplay between introversion and culture then. If I was a business leader, what do I need to do with culture that's going to make it more acceptable for introverts, so it's more acceptable for those slightly slower answers? Or what do I need to think about when it comes to culture?
Fundamentally, it is all about values. And it's often 3 or 4 really core values. Things like service, compassion, or values of humans, and things, valuing people and things like that. And it's really clear, or it's really important that you find people that share those values, but express them in different ways. And one of the questions I had on a conference I was speaking at last week was about how do you build diversity when you're trying to hire people for culture fit? Aren't you going to hire all the same people? And the answer is absolutely not, because you can find people that share values, really tight core values, but are completely different from all walks of life and all races and all personalities.
Fantastic.
So you have to be really clear on what those key core values are and what's okay in outworking those values. But that doesn't necessarily mean you've all got to be extroverts or you've all got to be introverts.
So you share the values, but not the way that you act, as long as you're acting within those values. And
correct.
So the role of the leader then is to ensure that there is a clear set of values and to help people internalize them and understand them, I guess.
Yeah, and be open to different ways of expressing them, particularly in organizations that work across multiple countries, because if you've got a value of service, that's going to express itself very differently in the British culture than it is in an Indian culture. But you have the same value, but the outworking is very different. And it's similarly with introverts and extroverts. You hold the same value, but the way you work out that value can be completely different.
We talked about a leadership tip. What tip would you offer for introverts that are in a culture that how would you help introverts?
The key is truly understanding the values and figuring out how you can express those values, because that is how you contribute to the culture. And as an introvert, you might do it very differently to an extrovert, but the core values will be expressed in a very different way. So like an introvert, answering the phone is one, I'll think about it and get back to you. Whereas an extrovert might solve the problem instantly.
But either way, the value was the phone gets answered positively within 6 nanoseconds or something.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, Ben, that is absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Should some of the listeners want to get back in touch with you and explore culture in more detail, what's the best way to do that?
If you go onto Google and search for the Culture Guy, I'm there at the top.
Okay. And I'll put your website into the sleeve notes for this episode as well. Ben, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, John.
And so it's time for the leadership tip of the week. The tip for people that are leading introverts and want to get more from their whole team, introvert, extrovert, and everything in between. This week is a simple thought for those who are leading others, especially if you have introverts in your team who don't have a lot of confidence. How can you as a leader help others be more confident? 3 simple tips. Number 1, recognize self-awareness. Introverts tend to have higher self-awareness than extroverts as they reflect on things more. Be aware of the self-awareness of team members. Consider that when thinking about confidence rather than just the obvious external manifestations. Number 2, support internal validation. To help an introvert be more confident means helping them validate themselves. Help them to understand what the elements of a great job are, and then help them work out how well they did against those elements. That internal validation will help an introvert's confidence much more than just saying, "Oh, well done." And number 3, support internal processing. In meetings and discussions, accept that some of your team will want to throw out an instant answer and that others need to think about it for a second. Support this by allowing everybody to answer and giving them time to do so, and you'll find that the confidence of team members will increase. Thank you for listening to Activate Your Introvert, and I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode. I'd love to see your reviews on the iTunes store. Thank you once again, and catch up with you next week.